Making headlines this week is a suggestion that all children should undergo psychological screening from birth to the age of 5 to highlight problems that could reduce their chances of succeeding later in life. A report by think tank Demos says it's crucial to track a child's development and that children who suffered emotional or educational disorders were far more likely to be unemployed as young adults. So, do we think it would help society if children's behaviour was monitored earlier than it is?
I think it would. I think because, you know, 1 to 7, they're the formative years, aren't they? And sometimes, you know, people say, give me a kid between 1 and 7 and I'll give you back the adult. So I think they're really crucial years. And I think if there's a way of identifying educational problems or, you know, learning difficulties, it can stop someone, you know, having a potentially painful life because they haven't identified it. A friend of mine, their boy was behaving like he couldn't control his body. His arms wouldn't... He couldn't keep his arms still, and they knew that he was 8 years old, and he used to get super excited about stuff, and they, you know, mother's instinct, they just felt that there was something wrong, and they identified that he was dyspraxic, which then meant that they could find the right school for him, and so he could get looked after and, you know, wouldn't get... you know, have a hard time. So
I agree with elements of it, I have to say. However, I do think that we must be very careful not to label children too early and too much, really, because I think we also give them the label of, oh, I'm a problem child. You know, for instance, Jake was very, very off the wall as a 2-3-year-old. He was very hyper and just a bit mad, really, but that was because the lifestyle we were leading. He didn't have a routine. And people used to say to me, well, probably 2 people actually said to me, do you think he's a bit, you know, has he got ADHD? Now, we know ADHD is a serious thing. And I thought, if I'd listened to them, I probably would have got myself into a terrible state, gone through what would have had to have gone through. But to be honest, he's now 8. He's a normal, hyperactive boy. And so I think you can't get better than listening to your own maternal instincts. So I think it's, as long as there's a balance and we don't go overboard thinking, oh, well, that behaviour, oh, maybe I need to take him, you know, maybe that means something.
I don't know what you mean,
sometimes it's a bit over the top.
But at the same time, you know, I've got members of my family who are dyslexic, for example. Now, way back in the day, didn't know what dyslexia was. You were just a bit slow at school and maybe you weren't very good with your reading and writing and spelling and what have you. Nowadays, that sort of thing can be pinpointed at such an early age and support can be given. Do you not think that maybe part of the problem is that some mums maybe have that mother's intuition that something isn't quite right, but they don't want their child labelled, so they actually don't want to look the problem in the face?
I think sometimes people are scared to look into things like that. I mean, my daughter, she had the kicking and screaming things in shops and, you know, but a lot of kids do that,
normal,
don't they?
Sherrie. That's normal.
Absolutely.
It isn't always normal.
But what I'm saying is that if you start looking into every kid that kicks and screams and has a tantrum, I think that would be going too far. Having said that, she then developed, and Keely and I have talked about this, quite dark moods. And that was quite young, quite, you know, 6 years old. And I couldn't understand it. And I'd talk her round and eventually she would cry and come out of it. Now, I felt really useless as a mother, absolutely useless, because I didn't know what to do. I felt I wasn't helping. Maybe if I'd had someone to say, why is this? Can you help me to say, you know, maybe talk to her. Instead of a mother, could you talk to her and find out why this happens? Maybe it's a chemical thing. If, you know, it could have been anything
That's right, because
that.
we're not just talking about, you know, children's behaviour in terms of education, it's also emotional development and that sort of thing. There's been some terrible cases recently in the newspaper, obviously, they're calling them tearaway kids and this sort of thing. Do you think that if children were to undergo psychological screening from birth to the age of 5, that maybe some of these cases, children, they'd be looked at, they'd maybe see the way that they were going and they
could definitely be prevented, I think, if you can... I mean, it's proven that children between the ages of 1 and 7 have really complex thoughts. I mean, you know, for example, I know of somebody whose child... had a problem going to the loo at a very young age and therefore decided was never going to do that again.
That's quite common.
At a very, very young age. So they work things out from when they're tiny. So, I mean, going back to so-called tearaway kids, I think there is something in there that they could probably detect at a very young age that could prevent and protect them and other people.
But they're not born... children... Babies aren't born bad. I mean, that. No. But where they live and how
Obviously,
they're brought up,
yeah.
that can make them. It's not always there's something wrong with them, is it?
No, also telling them that they're a problem child, or you've got problems, that's going to make their life problematic and make them feel different to everybody else. I don't think that's fair
but there
either.
are varying degrees of things, aren't there? And I think if you can identify if a child has a real, genuine problem, I think then it's worth doing.
OK, we're taking one.